Welcome back into the Lions 24/7 podcast. I am Tyler Donahue. Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan set to join me. We are underway with our first full-scale in-season podcast schedule setup. You're going to hear from the three of us each Monday. We'll go back, look at the last matchup, sort through some takeaways, some things we've had a chance to learn more about since the matchup ended. And also this year, because it's a new structure for us with James Franklin's press conferences, which has always in the past been on Tuesdays. Those are now Monday at noon. We've already been into Beaver Stadium this week. We've already heard from James Franklin for more than 30 minutes on Monday afternoon. So coming out of that, we'll have this press conference or this podcast episode for you on Mondays. We'll come back on Wednesday. This Wednesday, you're going to get a nice preview of Bowling Green, a 1-0 squad right now, 7-6 last year on their season. Coming to town, we'll hear from one of their beat reporters out there, and we'll also break down the latest in the recruiting world with Tyler Calvaruso, who will give us the lowdown on Matthew Allen. If you missed this on Monday, 24/7 wide receiver, flipping his commitment from Virginia Tech to Penn State. He was a top target earlier in the cycle, initially committed to the Hokies. They had a rough weekend, getting upset on the road at Vanderbilt. Penn State obviously looked a lot better offensively. Nice timing here, picking up the commitment. Been a nice 50 hours or so stretch for Marcus Hagan's the receivers coach. We'll dive into that edition. We'll start to look toward the guest list for Penn State's first home matchup and which recruits are expected to be in Beaver Stadium with Tyler Calvaruso next episode. And then Thursdays, every single Thursday, you will hear our preview episode for the upcoming matchup. And in this case, again, Bowling Green comes to town for a Saturday noon kickoff. But as promised, we lead off these Monday shows with Mark Brennan and Daniel Gallen, get our week started. We'll start to set the stage for game two, but a lot of this is going to be looking back at game one. And Mark, as I always say with these Monday episodes, Daniel and I had a chance to come fresh out of the game on Saturday evening. It was a long afternoon for you guys into evening there at Morgantown. So I've always give the mic to you on Monday. Daniel and I have said a lot of our piece about the stuff in our post-game episode, which I hope people caught on Saturday. If you haven't, we got 45 minutes available to you breaking down this matchup in Morgantown. Mark, to you, what were your overall takeaways from our long-awaited look at the Nittany Lions?
Yeah, I mean, relatively easy win. I mean, I think an argument could be made that it was the most impressive win by a Big Ten team this weekend. Obviously, USC did a nice job last night. But the thing that I liked about it is it wasn't one of these, 60 to 5 blowouts. I thought West Virginia was competitive enough and still kept fighting in the second half, that it gave the Penn State coaching staff, as well as that Penn State played on both sides of the ball. I think there were a lot of teaching moments. I think obviously with the offense, we were waiting to see. All the talk was, how is this thing going to look? And I thought it looked fantastic. But I still think with the offense, they could spread the ball around a little bit more. There's room to grow. And, afterward, Trey Wallace actually said we barely saw any of it. Nick Singleton said we barely saw any of it. Drew Allar talked like a quarterback and said all the structural things that they do were basically there. He didn't. I wanted to get him to say we didn't see much of it, and he was having none of it. But generally speaking, I think there's so much more growth they could have. So there's a lot to learn on that side. And over on defense, James Franklin opened up today and talked about how well the defense played, and I agree with him. But the mistakes in the second half, the penalties, lining up offside, Abdul Carter looking like he was just trying a little bit too hard. And James actually addressed that. I thought it was pretty cool. He said, yeah, Abdul was very open to constructive feedback. So that's an example of those teaching moments that come out of a game like that. You have this really impressive win, but there was still a lot for them to really dive into on Sunday. So to me, I think that's a good thing. And then with Andy Kotelnicki, I have to tell you, the three things that he was talking about, right? Get the ball in the hands of your best playmakers. Well, who scored the touchdowns? Katron Allen, Nick Singleton, Tyler Warren. Arguably going into the season, a breakout player notwithstanding, their three best non-quarterbacks on offense. Get the ball, number two, get the ball to your athletes in space. Harrison Wallace, Amari Evans, Katron Allen getting the ball in space. Obviously, Nick Singleton got the ball in space because he's able to bolt through a hole. That actually worked. And then keeping your opponent off balance. Who would have thought Drew Allar would have run for as many yards as he did? And then Pribula comes in and does some really good things to keep them off balance. So we had heard that mantra over and over and over and over and over and over and over again in the offseason. And when it came time to see it, which I think was really good. So I thought there was a lot riding on that game for Andy Kotelnicki. He won every single press conference. We loved what we saw from him at practice, but we didn't have a great sense for what they were doing in an 11 on 11 competition. And if they come out flat in that game, I think a lot of that goodwill he generated. I mean, we know how Penn State fans are, and that's not a knock. They're passionate. They want to see results. And if you didn't see results, I think there would have been a little bit different view of Andy Kotelnicki coming out of that game, but we did see the results. So generally speaking, I thought it was a great week for Penn State. Thought they played really well. Loved what they did on either side of the lightning delay. Scored going into it, scored coming out of it. Handled it much better than back in 2017 at Michigan State. Overall, just a really good performance by PSU.
We're going to dive into a lot of those topics that you just mentioned and players separately as we work our way through this podcast. But Daniel, I wanted to kind of bring up Andy Kotelnicki since Mark brought that one up. I mean, we've been pretty enamored with what this might look like for a long time. It was such a big move for James Franklin. And let's not forget, they had all of last December to really gain a head start on the process. But lo and behold, a lot of it came to fruition in front of us in not so easy circumstances to open your season and have to really get this thing launched. James Franklin said today during his press conference, which, by the way, you can see the full press conference at Lions247.com on video. But he said that there is a excitement about Andy Kotelnicki coming out of this one. That's probably feedback from players, feedback from fellow staff. Obviously, there's a lot of social media buzz about this guy, and we've got Gus Johnson screaming Big Zamboni 35,000 times in 6 hours, it felt like, on Saturday. So what do you make of the mystique here surrounding Andy Kotelnicki through his first game?
I think it's sort of what Mark just said, where if you come out flat in that game, I know that we talked about sort of what happens if Penn State goes 3 and out on the first 2 possessions. Where's the mindset? Where's everyone's mentality? I think that the fact that they came out well, they didn't squander any of the goodwill that they'd built up over the course of the season. And I think that it sort of checked all the boxes probably that people were looking for. You hit on a 50-yard touchdown to Trey Wallace. Nick Singleton has 2 40-yard runs. You sort of saw everything that was missing last year. And I think that that's something too that you can't, that all the big plays and everything and having Kotelnicki there was nice, but it was sort of making up for the absence of things. There was all this stuff we didn't see last year that we saw. Singleton and Allen in the backfield together, Bo Pribula mixed in, seemingly more in the flow. I think we saw these things that we didn't see last year that we thought could help, or that we thought we would see, or that we were told that we were going to see, but we didn't. And to see all of that in game one, and to see most of it work for the most part, I think is something that garners Andy Kotelnicki a lot of goodwill. And I think that this was a game, given where it was in the window, the lightning delay, what was happening at the same time, had a lot of national eyes on it, had a lot of other people that were interested to see what this could be. So I think in terms of perception, it was a home run for Penn State through one game.
The body of work, there's a lot to like on offense, but when you think about what are the images that come to mind from the day, all due respect to Nick Singleton, is very much that connection between Drew Allar, Harrison Wallace. And I'm checking our vote at Lions247.com. We do our annual player of the game for Penn State. Right now, Drew Allar trending slightly ahead of Harrison Wallace, but these guys are far and away the lead recipients for our MVP vote. Now, I don't know if an MVP performance, we'll let our vote.
Breakout voting now. What's the breakout?
But it sure was a breakout performance, Mark. And with that, I'm going to pass.
It only took 9 minutes.
What do you make of what Harrison Wallace managed to show us? And you were front and center with Harrison after this game. As a conversation we've all waited to have with him for a long time, if he actually was able to go out and have a performance like this. What do we need to know from his post game, and what do we need to know about your perspective from those 60 minutes of football? Really, the first half of football for him is when he did all his damage.
We were laughing in the press box because for people who weren't following along, Tyler called Harrison Wallace his breakout performer for the season, predicted it. And I took issue with that because he started 6 games last year, and I didn't think he could be a breakout guy. But I have to give you credit, Tyler. as the best reporter on the beat, that qualifies. That definitely qualified as a breakout performance. I have to give it to you. You win. I mean, you actually got that. And listen, after the game, it was less about what he said. Like when I got there, he was surrounded by a lot of people, and I don't think it was the most completely comfortable thing. Daniel talked to him a little bit later, I think. And but the smile on his face, you could tell a weight had been lifted off of this kid, how difficult last season was. We've been joking around about this, but in all seriousness, we heard from multiple people on the record and off that this was a guy coming out of camp last year who was their best receiver. And then he plays well in the first 2 games, then he gets banged up, and he was never quite the same. Only played, I think, in 8 games. I think he started 6. And you could just tell last year that how difficult that was for him. And then when we talked to him in the offseason, you could tell how anxious he was to get to the season. And then for it to work out that way, you have to feel good for him. You feel bad for anybody going through an injury situation. I don't care on what team, but just the smile on his face, he just seems so relieved. And that's a cool thing. Now, knock on wood, let's hope that kid's able to stay healthy, because if he is, wow. I mean, the chemistry that he has going with Drew Allar already is something. I think we all expected him to be good. I don't know that I expected him to be that good. But now, I will add, they really focused on getting the ball to the 2 receivers, to Trey and to Amari Evans. They have to work on spreading that out a little bit. But they built a great foundation. You got the ball into the hands of key guys, but now I don't think you could just and clearly they know this, that they're going to have to start spreading the wealth.
We're going to talk about some of those other receivers momentarily. And you just look at the 3-quarter span for Wallace. So I know it's tricky, me tacking on that 4th quarter against the Peach Bowl. And Daniel was like, barely remember that moment of our lives. And I agree with him in some ways. But you look at the 3-quarter stretch, to when they go into halftime, he gets 9 catches for 184 yards and 3 touchdowns in the 4th quarter of the Peach Bowl in the first half of the ensuing game after an offseason of really quality work with Drew Allar. And remember that blue-white game? I mean, he was clearly the favorite target that afternoon. And for whatever you wanted to take away from that game, or quote-unquote game, it was that Harrison Wallace and Drew Allar were in a good place together. And Daniel, you wrote about both of these guys separately coming out of the matchup, about Drew's confidence and swagger and that bit. And we're going to get to that momentarily. But these were the co-MVPs on offense when Penn State put out their staff picks for MVP. And, we've got 11 more regular season games to go to watch these guys grow together. But isn't this essentially exactly, if you could have written the fairy tale ending to the offseason of hard work between these two, isn't this what it was? The first half of fireworks, a couple touchdowns, that doubled Harrison Wallace's career total for touchdowns, and Drew just showing that faith. His first 4 pass completions were all in the direction of number 6.
Yeah, I think that's sort of how you draw it up when you're coming into the year, when you talk about a performance to not only boost the confidence of 2 really key players for a team with playoff aspirations, but also to send a message to your fan base that this year is going to be different, to send a message to other teams in the Big Ten and teams on your schedule that we're different this year, that we know what everyone saw last year and we went in and we addressed it. But I just think overall, I kind of like what Mark was talking about with Harrison Wallace, what he had to go through to get to this point, and to finally prove what he can do. James Franklin referenced it a little bit during his post-game news conference, where he was like, you guys have heard me talking about this for a long time. Now you have something to write about. And that's a little bit how I felt about it. We've talked about Harrison Wallace going back to last year, Tyler. I know that you were a big proponent of this is what we've seen versus this is what we keep hearing, and that at some point you have to have that. You have to have proof when you're in our perspective and in our seat looking at things. And I think that we really started to get that on Saturday in West Virginia. And so I think for Wallace, this is the type of performance that I feel like can only boost his confidence. I feel like it can only boost the confidence of Drew Allar too, and of this offense as a whole. When you have a guy like Trey Wallace, who did a little bit of everything, hit the home run, made the tough catch, moved the chains in some other key junctures. That's just an all-around performance. He's not a one-trick pony. And I think that that's just very, very solid for this Penn State offense.
Let's stay with you here, Daniel, because you've got the celebrity status bubbling up now here on Monday, coming out of the first game. Big Ten networks tweeting out your playful banter between you and James Franklin. I'm just glad that they were focused on the word that you brought up and not your status as a Maryland grad, which is what James Franklin also asked you. I checked your ID, checked your degree, I guess I should say, in Maryland grad, and you guys, as you mentioned, crossed paths in 2010 back there. But here in 2024, Daniel, you talked about Drew Allar being demonstrative and how he was on the field, the way he put himself out there as a new team captain, as a second-year starting quarterback on the road, where I'm sure he was hearing a lot of colorful language from the home crowd out there before and during the game. And he faced some adversity early in that contest, and part of that was because he was letting an official see the confidence that he had. So, Daniel, what did you kind of get out of James Franklin's answer after you guys were done with your little side conversation? And ultimately, you've had a chance now to write about this from a couple angles at Lions 24/7 before we got to kickoff, about the anecdotal evidence from August that, oh, Drew's going to step up, and coming out of the matchup now that we have it in front of us and we have some evidence there right before our eyes. How are you marrying those two things, and what do you think it means for this Nittany Lions team?
Yeah, I got my Maryland diploma right over there. I got the Juan Dixon SI cover right there over my shoulder. It's pretty funny. It took until year 4 for that to come up too, which about time. With James Franklin, I think the one thing that was pretty revealing that he said on Monday about Drew Allar and the way that he was carrying himself was that he didn't necessarily expect to see that, or that wasn't something that going into the game that he thought he would see. I mean, based on what some of the Penn State defenders said, that's how what we saw Saturday is how Allar has been in practice and stuff. But I think for Franklin, it was seeing it on the field, seeing it in the heat of the moment. That was something that really stood out to him.
Daniel, can I just give the quote, because I think it'll set you up a little. There's the quote from Franklin to finish his commentary actually on Drew this afternoon. He said, quote, "I don't think I necessarily would have said I knew that was coming, but I sure was glad it happened." That's how he finished it out.
Yeah, and I think that sort of shows that this is also something that is continuing to evolve with Allar in this role, Allar taking on this responsibility, and that it is something that really is new for Allar and for this team. But I did think it was interesting too how James Franklin said that confidence is something that you earn, swagger is something that you earn. It's not something you're given. I thought that was also interesting in sort of how we talk about sports sometimes, where coaches talk about trying to give players confidence. I feel like that's a cliche that comes up a little bit. And for Franklin to see Allar taking it and earning it, I think kind of sets up what was going on behind the scenes this offseason with what Allar was doing in terms of organizing these workouts, throwing in the exit interviews and with Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki, and Danny O'Brien have come up a couple times. Whenever Allar talks about this change, I guess you could call it, this offseason, he really does cite O'Brien really pushing him to be this kind of quarterback, which is something that I find pretty interesting. So there's a lot going on here, and I think that you are curious, how does this carry throughout the season? What does this look like when you get to October at USC, when you get to November against Ohio State? If you're on the road at Purdue and things start to go sideways, how does this come up? How does this show through? But I think for right now, we've, and what Franklin has said, what Allar's teammates have said, that a corner, I guess, has been turned. I don't know if that's the best way to phrase it, but it seems like that there is this new personality, different personality, different confidence that's really coming through.
I think it's one thing if this kind of deal happens at home against Bowling Green in week 1, But to go down there where, again, it was not welcoming for QB1. He was the first guy on the field, and I saw some video of some of the things he was hearing from the crowd early. I mean, it was a nice little pressure cooker moment early for him, especially after that snap leads to the fumble. He's not anticipating it. Big, healthy dose of adversity. And so, Mark, before we turn the page, we spent a lot of time talking about Drew in the post game, naturally. We've been projecting what it might look like. What do you see with your own eyes out there?
I love the fact that he threw the ball down the field, right? I mean, I think that's almost been a little bit lost, and that was something that they just didn't do. I mean, obviously against West Virginia last year, he had the long completion, touchdown completion to Keandre Lambert-Smith, but the way that he was able to stretch the field, and then the fact that he was able to do things with his legs. He talked in the offseason about dropping 10 or 15 pounds or whatever it was, and you could really see it. And then, that stiff arm, I mean, Josiah Trotter is a legit player. I mean, that's just not some walk-on scrub out there. I mean, this is, and that's no offense to walk-ons. They can be tough too. But, this is a guy, son of an NFL legend in my view, and brother of a Philadelphia Eagle, and, clearly a talented player. And actually, you look at his numbers in the game, and he played well overall. But to do that, wow. And I thought when that was a key thing that Franklin said too, when he was answering Daniel's question, to not only do that, but to do it over by the Penn State sideline. When you talk about earning respect, hey, it's one thing to earn respect by leading the offseason workouts or by saying the right thing. It's another to earn respect by stiff arming a guy into the artificial turf, at Mountaineer Field. That goes a long way. James Franklin obviously took a little bit of exception in the preseason over something someone said about Allar. I'm not sure exactly what it was, but when he talked about how the coaches and the players all had to respect to vote him a captain, that's all fine. But then to see him do it as a player on the field and in that toughness moment, I thought that was really something.
There was a line that we got from Dennis Sutton during the final week of preseason camp, and we were covering all sorts of topics during the conversation, but the status of Drew Allar, who we came to campus with as a fellow 5-star recruit in that 2022 class, came up, and his development, and be more of a fiery guy, be more of a leader. And he just straight up said, he said, "I have all my faith in Drew." He said, quote, "Our season sort of depends on him." So these guys, that as much as they saw on the practice field, they had to be, okay, how's he going to respond when the Mountaineers, clean his clock, or when things go awry there? And I think, he passed a significant test. We'll see what kind of test he faces between now and say, October. That, we'll see. But it felt like this was a really significant one. And to talk about this for a bit was worthwhile. I think we need to turn the page, though, to Jalen Reed, because he was somebody that we spent a lot of time on that post-game podcast breaking down. I know everybody watching the matchup from the earliest defensive series were wondering, wow, what's number one about? He ended up playing about 50 of his 60 snaps, either in the box or in the slot, took ownership of that lion role. Daniel, you had a story up on Sunday coming out of the matchup about Jalen and his comfort level right off the bat, and what is clearly going to be arguably the most valuable position in Tom Allen's defense, at least if he's going to play it like he did on Saturday.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. Reed said that he hadn't really played in the slot or a position like that since he was in high school, which for him, he's a senior. Then it's been a while, but he looked like a natural there. You watch that very first play of the game, and he's down there with Jalen Kimber and somebody else I'm forgetting, in the slot, pointing, directing traffic, then starting to bail back right before the snap, tracking the wide receiver all the way across and breaking up the pass. I mean, I thought that just really, I've been using this phrase a lot in my writing, because writing about Allar, writing about Reed, writing about KJ Winston, but just setting the tone. I'm going to have to go to thesaurus.com after this to figure that out. But I just thought that, he did such a good job of, being physical, being up there. He had that hit where he knocked the wind out of the guy, or he got the wind knocked out of himself and breaking up that pass. I just thought that we saw an all-around performance, which is, I think, what we thought that Penn State would need out of that lion position, because you're in a lot of those sets, you're taking that third linebacker off the field. He's lined up with tight ends. He's occasionally following running backs. maybe even a slot receiver sometimes. I mean, there's just a ton of responsibility that goes into that. And I think that one thing that you really have to do is you have to effort it. I think that that's just a real key to the game. And James Franklin noticed it. I told the story on the post game pod on Saturday night where he came over to him, said that he was playing at a different speed out there. Reed circled back to it later when I was talking to him, and he said that the one thing that he was going to do on the field, and the one thing that he said that he was harping on going into the game was, quote, "I'm going to run to the ball at all times. I'm going to give full effort." That is the approach that he went in with. KJ Winston said the same thing, that he and Reed all through practice during the week, they treated every rep they had like it was a game. They wanted to be ready so that when they got to the game, they knew what it would feel like. And I think that really showed with how Reed started the game and how that really sustained through that first half.
He was fantastic. He had a couple of pass breakups. He had one where he just tracked the ball and turned on the jets downfield to break one up. It went kind of full extension. He had a fumble recovery, 9 tackles, one of them for loss. But Mark, not to be outdone, KJ Winston, 12 tackles. That was a team high. That was 7 solo stops. That was a team high. And then he also forced a fumble. And right before we sat down to record, he was named the Big Ten's Defensive Player of the Week. So Penn State staff goes with Jalen Reed as their Defensive Player of the Week. Then you got the Big Ten at large going with KJ Winston. At the end of the day, you look for what the height matches preseason versus after game one. And where all systems go with the safety tandem there. And by the way, they had the most snaps, number 3 on defense, Zakee Wheatley.
Yeah, the cool thing is they combined for 21 tackles, and none of them were in the final 9 minutes of the game. So, and then, the number that you put out there, Tyler, 7 solo tackles for a safety. Wow. I mean, you think about the space that you're making those tackles in. For reference, KJ Winston had 34 solos all last season. That's 13 games. I mean, that's three or four solo tackles a game. So to get that out to 7. But listen, we talked about this Tom Allen system, and what was one of the keys going to be? It was going to be the performance of the safeties. And not only did you have the top 2, but Zakee Wheatley started as well. So they started with only 2 linebackers. So you can't do that unless you have these guys who are comfortable, number one, playing in space, or, as you mentioned with Jalen Reed, comfortable up by the line of scrimmage. And clearly these guys are. So it's so interesting when you typically talk about a defense. And I think the line on this defense is the front 4, which they can rotate in, how many people. I think it's terrific. And I think the linebackers are good and have a chance to get better and better and better. But to see the foundation of a defense being your safeties is pretty interesting. But it's obviously very smart given how well those guys are playing.
Yeah, and last year, his MO was he did not miss tackles. I think he had the second highest tackle rate among all safeties in terms of avoiding missed tackles among PFF statistics coming out of the 2023 season. That's why a lot of people have him pegged as a first-round talent, because he has these athletic intangibles that are really exciting in the traits, and you can see the eyeball test. And now you factor in that he's considered a deep-rooted locker room leader now, a team captain, someone who's huge on accountability, and he doesn't miss tackles. That's a pretty ridiculous combination, and we're seeing that spotlight find him very quickly. Daniel, early reaction from you on the work that we saw those 3 safeties put in. I should mention Zakee Wheatley, again, a career high in snaps for him on the day. He was almost to 60 snaps himself. He had 5 tackles, he shared 1 for loss. So all 3 of these guys as advertised, essentially.
It's a group that has a lot of responsibility, and I don't necessarily know if I would say there's a lot of pressure on them, but there's just a lot that they're going to be asked to do in different situations. And I think that Tom Allen came in and with Anthony Poindexter, Terry Smith, everyone on the coaching staff, I think they really identified the secondary and then within that safety group as a real strength of this team, because you have all returners who have played a lot of football for you, and they're putting a lot on those guys' plates. And I think early on, we really saw them deliver. I think it's going to be kind of a week-to-week thing, where this week it was Reed and Winston. Maybe when we get further into the schedule and you're seeing teams that are a little bit more pass happy or that go through the air a little bit more, then maybe you see Zachy Wheatley pop up with interceptions or being around the ball a little bit more downfield. So I think that this was a group that coming into the year I was really high on. I'm really excited to see what they can do. And I think all three of these guys have futures beyond Penn State. And I think to have that performance in week 1 is just really, really solid and a really good way to start the season.
So Jalen Reed was the staff's pick for defensive MVP. We mentioned Allar and Harrison Wallace, and then also Tamir Robinson was the staff pick for special teams. Unfortunately, he was also injured along the way, it appeared, during that matchup. We don't know what the specifics are of that, but by the end of this, Mark actually spotted him in the tunnel. He was in street clothes. He was not in uniform. It appeared something happened on a kickoff coverage moment, and he was a standout in kickoff coverage, a couple tackles on special teams. Didn't get to see a lot of involvement from him at linebacker. I think if he was available toward the tail end of this game, that would have been a different case. But Mark, I want to get to linebacker with you because Robinson, not a factor on defense in this one. And really, you look beyond the main three. It was Kobe King and Tony Rojas getting the start as expected. But Don DeLuca was up over 40 snaps when it was all said and done, too. And then Tyler Elsdon, the only other linebacker who really had any kind of run of significance in this game on defense. He was over 20 snaps on the day. So I think it shows us that they're playing things pretty tightly right now with linebacker. We've been talking about depth there. It wasn't a big moment for Abdul Carter to be spending a lot of time at the second level. But I think the reality is they're going to get to open up the sideline a little bit with some of these September matchups. But when it comes to it and it's a big matchup, how comfortable will they feel going beyond those top 3, maybe 4 guys? That's going to be a question that we get to later in the year.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see this week in practice if Tamir's there. It's hard to judge, but just by what I saw after the game, there didn't seem to be any braces or anything on him, and he seemed to be in really good spirits. So hopefully, for his sake, he's going to be okay, but you could see where he could really help. The thing I would say, Tyler, is that you're looking at a West Virginia offense that led all major conference programs in rushing yards last year. So even with the players that you have, Penn State was able to limit them to 2.3 yards per carry. And even if you take out the 19 lost rushes or lost rushing yards, for the bad snap or whatever happened, they were still at 2.8 yards per carry. So that's an effective rushing team. I know they lost a couple linemen, but those linemen overall have all played a lot of football, and we know how good those running backs are, and we know how good that quarterback is at running the ball. So I actually think there's a lot when you look at the linebacker core, the fact and the defense as a whole, I think there's a lot to be said for what they were able to do against a team that really hangs its hat on being able to rush the ball. And let's face it, that West Virginia probably wouldn't even have gotten to where it was if Penn State wasn't blowing that thing out and then started making some penalties and whatnot, which is fine. That's an opening game. But I think overall they're going to be just fine. They can't afford any other injuries at linebacker, though. They need those guys who are playing well. I thought Elsdon came in and actually did a really nice job in some goal line situations or short yardage situations, but they need those guys to stay healthy because the depth just isn't there.
Elston's an interesting backup. He's a 5th-year senior, really respected in the locker room. He started all 13 games back in 2022 in that kind of a 60-40 split with Kobe King, and now he's settled in as a second teamer here. And again, you look beyond those top 3, you're going to continue to see safety position kind of robbing or depleting the snap count essentially from this linebacker room on a week-to-week basis, we think. But I think it says a lot about, Mark, to your point, how well situated those top 3 guys are right now to be impact players and in a variety of ways. And they've all gotten bigger. I think DeLuca went from 218 last year to 230. We've talked about Tony Rojas and his physical progression in a couple of years. Kobe King is about as maxed out as you can possibly get on his frame right now. And these guys bring athleticism and accountability too. So it's a really good unit at the top. But because of what has happened and Kavion Keys no longer being with the program and Keon Wiley being sidelined, and we'll see where Tamir Robinson is, but he was the ascending one. He was kind of the one you were clinging to as the next man up maybe for you. And Anthony Specca is someone we'll continue to monitor moving forward, a freshman who got to campus this summer. James Franklin mentioned this. Mark just referenced the stats. It was a really strong defensive performance. Daniel, is there a case to be made that this defensive performance has gone under the radar because of how much we've talked about those explosive plays and Drew Allar's emergence and all those things? Because James Franklin went out of his way in this press conference to go comparison by comparison by comparison and saying all the ways that the 2024 season opener effort for this defense was statistically superior to what they pulled off in Beaver Stadium last year.
I mean, yeah, I think this defensive performance went under the radar, but that's just the nature of the beast, I guess. Tom Allen wasn't really a sexy hire. Andy Kotelnicki was. We knew what we had from the defense last year. A ton of names coming back. I think that the interesting things or the intrigue around the defense was a little bit more niche. It's, okay, what does Abdul Carter look like as a defensive end? What does Jalen Reed look like in that line position? How do these transfers fit in a little bit? It wasn't quite as big picture, where with the offense, it's, okay, do we have an offense that can beat Ohio State? Do we have an offense that could win national championships, get to the college football playoff? I think that you had a lot of focus on the offense. I mean, we probably didn't start talking about the defense on the post-game pod until we were about 35 minutes in, which was 2 minutes after I told Mark I'd be done in 5 minutes. So it was just one of those things where that was the big story coming out of it, and rightfully so. I mean, I think that, given what we saw from this offense, from these two units last year, it's more of a surprise and more noteworthy that the offense played like this, and as opposed to the defense playing like this, given the standard that they've set. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting the way that James Franklin framed that, how West Virginia did a year ago against this defense versus this year. And he ran through a lot of statistical categories. I was trying to jot them all down in real time, and I got behind and just threw an etc. In there when I posted it on our message board. But yeah, I think this defense, for one weekend at least, was a little bit under the radar.
Mark, there's kind of a lot for us to get to still, but I want to take this moment because it's going to end Tuesday night at midnight, and we've got a lot of content that people can check out. Our snap count breakdown, a bunch of just takeaways early in the week here. We're going to get a chance to hear from players, coaches, as things we're going to see practice. And the reason I say all this, VIP deal is going on that we have just for kickoff. It was during the weekend, so if you didn't take advantage of that, it's actually ending Tuesday. And Mark, as usual, I think you're better at delivering the spiel than I am for this kind of thing. So one more time before we dive back into the remainder of our itinerary for this episode.
Yeah, and remember, another visit weekend. I mean, big recruiting week, and not a gigantic one, but there's enough going on that it's worth your while to be paying attention at the VIP level. Penn State just got a flip. We have VIP analysis up there now from Brian Doan, instant analysis from Brian Doan, which I love at the VIP level. But it's 75% off an annual subscription, comes out to less than $250 a month. So it's a really good deal. And listen, the three of us live in State College. We're at every single event that we could possibly be at. We travel to every game. I think the value of a subscription was really kind of borne out this weekend when there was this rain delay or this weather delay, and we're there in the press box and able to communicate back to people what's going on. Now, some of that was free material, but we're also able to help out our VIP people. So it's a great deal. And Penn State, there was a lot of question marks about what this team would be all about. Well, it passed the first test with flying colors. So if you're thinking about coming on board, 75% off our usual rate. It's an awesome deal. We'll take you all the way around to next year at this time. We're among the network leaders in subscriptions sold. Everybody who came on board, thank you. Our current subscribers, thank you. You make us, you allow us to go and cover these games and do everything that we do, but would love for more Penn State fans to come on board. Again, 75% off. Ends tomorrow, Tuesday, as we record this Monday. So tomorrow, Tuesday at midnight.
Yeah, Mark brings up a great point, too. We're getting our first visit weekend this weekend, and with 7 home games, that means 7 huge recruiting events, especially with that whiteout, and that's all going to be inclusive with this. And when we get the transfer portal stuff, you're all covered. It's an annual subscription, at 75% off.
One other thing, Tyler. And I'm just telling people, if you are at the VIP level, okay, you can go to every other site on the 24/7 Sports Network and read the VIP message boards and comments. And you know where that's a lot of fun? When you're watching USC in a game against LSU, and you could go check out their in-game thread. Now you can't participate because they don't want fans going in and from other schools and ripping it up. But to see the ebbs and flows, you realize that it's not only Penn State fans who take this stuff so seriously, but you get a really good feel for what these opposing fans are thinking about their teams in real time. It's really fun. And I know sometimes you won't have an opportunity to do that when Penn State's playing. There's other games going on. But, Sunday night, I'm watching USC versus LSU. USC's making one stupid call after another, and you're in there and you could follow it in real time. I know I'm going off on this, but it is a lot of fun to see how the fans are reacting and to realize that there are crazy fans in a good way everywhere.
It's a really special community network across America, and we're so tethered in with CBS and Paramount that you'll be surprised by some of the perks that will pop up through this membership. But I think that's enough for now. 75% off. It's active until Tuesday night at midnight. So you've got a little bit of cushion depending on when you're hearing this. Let's get into some things that we heard from James Franklin. And upon further review from game one, we covered a lot about QB1, but QB2 was out there quite early and often. On Saturday, Bo Pribula handled the third snap after the first touchdown. We saw him out there for the 2-point try and an incomplete pass in the direction of Joey Schlaffer. Ultimately, though, Bo Pribula, 20 snaps in this game, only the third game in his career that he's reached that many snaps, and 2 first-down runs along the way. We know what he can do with his feet, but now what they have on film is a 19-yard pass to Tyler Warren. And with that, Daniel, James Franklin kind of opened up to a lot of other possibilities. They say they want to get essentially as much evidence of Bo Pribula being different things as they can out there on film. And I think September is going to be the perfect time to do that. But not only did he say working by himself as a quarterback, working through passes, working as a runner, working as a receiver, James Franklin even felt the need to throw out there. So that's compelling enough. But Daniel, it's very clear that Bo Pribula is going to be part of the plan. I think we can kind of ditch the notion that there's a Bo Pribula package. You talked about, the need for this to be seamless. And if it's seamless, it kind of needs to be intertwined with what they're going to do on a series-to-series basis versus something that's kind of going to be clunky and be like, Bo's out here. Let's reset everything we're doing.
Yeah, I've been harping on this a little bit, but this is sort of like the opposite of last year when you talk about this year wanting to put a lot of stuff on tape, whereas opposed to last year, it was, well, we're just going to say we're doing it. We're going to leave that specter out there. So you have to think about it. But this year, they're actually putting stuff on tape. They're actually using Pribula in these situations. I think to see him throw, I think that that's something that maybe we'll see more of through this non-conference slate. I think that is the one thing that you really, really want to get on tape, because when Pribula's throwing and they're making plays through the air when he's in the game, I think that's when you're really putting opposing defenses in a bind. So that was something that stood out to me. But I think that this kind of goes back to what Andy Kotelnicki talked about with the play calls and being like Legos and fitting together. That's how I view the Pribula package a little bit, where you just start adding on all these different things to it in terms of passing, throwing, play action, keeping the ball, which running backs you're putting out there with him. I think that you can really build this however you want when he's out there. And we saw Drew Allar. I think one thing that was interesting this year is that Drew Allar I don't think he's left the field yet when Pribula has come in either. So that's something that you still have out there. You still have that 2 quarterback thing going on. So we'll see what this looks like. I'm intrigued by it. I think I feel a little bit better about it now that it's a concrete thing that we've seen, as opposed to just the idea that it spent most of last year as.
I think James Franklin said, if defenses want to treat it like it's a Wildcat package, and let's be honest, in the past, it has looked like a Wildcat package. Part of that is because Bo Pribula's been, getting his opportunities when Penn State's up by 20 points in the fourth quarter. It's not really the time to let it air out. But I mean, think about the way Will Levis was used. I mean, we knew he was going to run the ball essentially when he was in there for so much of his career here at Penn State. It felt like more like a wildcat package than it did a dual threat quarterback situation. So James Franklin wanting to expand upon that week by week. And you look at how the schedule shapes up. If you want to give the USCs, Wisconsins, and Ohio States of the world a lot to digest when they get ready for you beyond the obvious of Nick Singleton and Drew Allar and Harrison Wallace and Tyler Warren, that's a great way to do it. Mark, what did you think about Bo Pribula's use and what he could mean overall to the identity of this offense?
Well, you guys are touching on it. I mean, the fact that he's able to go in there and look comfortable and you don't know exactly what's going to happen. I mean, he did everything from running option to dropping back and throwing it to Tyler Warren to running it himself. So it makes it unpredictable. And I'm just anxious to see what else they can do. I think, again, it speaks to Andy Kotelnicki. It seemed as if last year, and I'm done talking about the previous coordinator, other than it seemed as if they were trying to fit their personnel to the system, right? Like they were trying to fit the personnel to the system. And it seems to me, I'm not a coach, but if you look at what Kotelnicki's done in his short body of work, it seems like he's fitting his system to the personnel. And I don't think that is more true with anybody than Bo. I mean, because of the different things he can do. So that to me is the big part about Bo Pribula is they're not trying to make him do X, Y, and Z. They're looking at him and saying, okay, these are the things he can do. Let's allow him to do it.
It's Andy Kotelnicki talking the talk and walking the walk in terms of finding the weapons he wants to use and then implementing that right off the bat. And
he told us that, Tyler, like way back. I mean, he said we're going to find ways to play Bo Pribula.
He said he's too valuable of a weapon for us not to find ways, and there he is. Play 3 of the season on offense. So definitely something we'll be tracking moving forward. Over at wide receiver, beyond the obvious of Harrison Wallace and the nice catch downfield for Omari Evans, which continues momentum for him. You brought up Julian Fleming, Mark, during the press conference. He's a guy that James Franklin was very complimentary of. If you check the box score after this game, you may think, well, where the heck was Julian Fleming? He actually tied with Harrison Wallace for the most snaps out of any receiver, 35 of those. Again, we have a snap breakdown at Lions247.com. But with Fleming, James Franklin was quick to point out his blocking pedigree, and we discussed that a lot and what he meant to the Buckeyes offense as a run blocker. He was also quick to point to his run routes and his ability to help free up Tyler Warren on that touchdown pass from Bo Pribula that we just referenced because of what he did downfield and how that impacted the safety. Now, Fleming didn't see a target in this matchup. James Franklin talked about wanting to spread the wealth a little bit more. They weren't in a situation to be pass happy in the second half. Drew Allar didn't play down the stretch. But you want to see some more involvement there. I mean, so that compare and tacked on to the fact that Caden Saunders may be back in play at receiver. We don't know that yet, Daniel, but James Franklin said they got him out there at punt returner. They were happy to do that. They're very comfortable with him at punt returner. They felt like they needed him at punt returner, and he did clear things medically, but maybe wasn't where they were confident enough to send him out offensively. So he didn't play at receiver at all. If you've got Fleming, getting his feet underneath him, and then Caden Saunders perhaps resurfacing here, it's good that this is not a long-term issue. It doesn't seem to be something that's going to linger and impact him deeper into the season. We haven't seen the complete arsenal at receiver yet, and the returns are still pretty darn good early on.
Yeah, I think that as time goes on, we'll see more of these players involved. I mean, there's been a topic of conversation about the lack of targets that certain guys got. And I mean, Drew Allar only threw the ball 17 times.
Mm-hmm.
There are 18 throws in the game, including Pribula. I mean, that's just not a lot for the way that college football is, especially the way college football is played today. So you only have so many to go around. They made a concerted effort to get the ball to Harrison Wallace early and often. And then we saw some of Omari Evans in there. But I think that when Penn State gets that full complement together, when Saunders is back to 100%, when they can play him on offense, as Fleming becomes more and more involved, I think that you're going to see the pieces fit together really nicely and interact really well. Franklin went out of his way to outline how Fleming had a key hand in two of the touchdown passes with the route that he ran to occupy a safety to draw the attention of the opposing defense, and Allar and then Pribula both made the right read to make it happen. So I think that once you get the full complement together. I think you've got a lot of guys that can do a lot of different things that complement each other. We'll see Tyler Johnson and Anthony Ivy. I think we're going to have a lot of eyes on you two, and Mekhi Flowers too, over these next 2 games, given how we expect them to go and what kind of opportunities should be there. But I think that you have a group that is hungry, wants to prove itself, and knows that it took a step toward that on Saturday.
I think between that performance and the Matthew Allen commitment, again, it's been a really nice pivot for Marcus Hagans in terms of perception externally. And you mentioned Tyler Johnson. He was involved a bit. He made his college debut. He's a redshirt sophomore. You saw Anthony Ivy getting his second college game. He's a redshirt sophomore. Their classmate, Mekhi Flowers, who moved over from safety, he got a little bit of action in this game. So just good to see them getting their feet wet in power conference opportunities. We think September will bring some more chances for them too. And we spent a lot of time discussing the right tackle rotation and whether that would be a thing. It really wasn't. Anthony Donko got about 50 snaps. Nolan Rucci helped close this game out at right tackle. James Franklin said they are really high on Anthony Donko, and that's mentally, physically, fundamentally. Feel like they really, behind closed doors, we've been hearing for a long time, they feel like he could be a franchise tackle. And now coming out of game 1, that has not been dispelled in any way. So Nolan Rucci going to be involved here in September, but James Franklin says they want to get him involved, but Anthony Donko is in a good spot at right tackle. But over at cornerback, this was one that was a bit more surprising, I think, in terms of how it was skewed, Mark. Not only did those transfer players start, Jalen Kimber and A.J. Harris, but they both more than doubled the snap total of any other cornerback. And James Franklin reiterated today, we have 6 guys we think can play a bunch of football for us. And that's without including the freshmen that they brought in this year. And he says it's going to be week by week. It's just like it was during preseason camp to determine who that starter is. He says maybe don't get too cozy with who started game 1. He mentioned that at cornerback. He mentioned that at some other spots. But Kimber, Harris were out there. Harris was targeted twice. Kimber was targeted 6 times. A little more active day for him. But these guys stepped up. They looked the part. They looked like big-time pickups. Cam Miller played a bit. Elliott Washington flashed a bit. Came with an interception. There's a lot of names here. Now, Davian Collins, kind of stunningly, after all the offseason conversation, was pretty low on that pecking order. He played about a dozen snaps. So cornerback comes out of this with the transfers up ahead, but James Franklin cautioning us and saying, we're just getting underway with this competition.
Yeah, I like how James started off by saying there's no changes to the depth chart. And then he says nobody should be comfortable. First of all, they don't put out a depth chart. So I don't know if he means our depth chart or what, but there will be some changes to our depth chart, obviously. But the thing I liked about both of those transfers is the aggressiveness with which they've played, or with which they played. They had a field mic that we could hear in the press box, and I got to tell you, Kimber was a little. He had some very interesting things to say to people. He was trash talking, and you wondered where that trash talk was going to come from with Johnny Dixon no longer in the program. And I think Kimber may be picking that up, which is kind of odd because you talk to him off the field and he's such a mild-mannered guy. But I think both of those guys play with that aggressiveness and that attitude that Terry Smith just loves. And we thought maybe somebody else was going to start. We thought Collins was going to start, but it didn't happen that way, but I thought both of those guys played really well. It's going to be interesting to see what happens when they play against a team that throws the ball much better than West Virginia. As much as I like Green, he's a good quarterback, but he's not tremendously accurate, and I didn't think their receivers were very good at all. So that wasn't a unit that, to me, that was extremely tested. It's going to be fun to see when they actually are tested who rises to the top at that point.
It was really dominance from the back end of the defense in this game. We do think they could be the best secondary in the Big Ten, perhaps the country, and they really looked that part on the road against West Virginia, but bigger tests lie ahead. Daniel, when you look at the defensive end position, which is obviously when you talk about high-level cornerback play, high-level edge rushers, that's a beautiful tandem. Abdul Carter was kind of given a little bit of an updated scouting report for us from James Franklin today through his first game at defensive end. And then Smith Filbert, James Franklin's always been quick to put praise toward Filbert, but now we have him coming out of a game in which he picked up a sack. Filbert spoke with us in a one-on-one setting earlier this year about how motivated he was, not just for himself, but for his family, to go out and prove that he's going to be worth an NFL roster spot down the road. And James Franklin went so far as to saying not only are we going to talk about him today, but nationally, he's going to be someone that gets discussed. He's that kind of an athlete at 6'5", 6'6", 280 plus pounds right now with the way he can move, some of those pass rush moves he brings in his tool bag. So take it wherever you want, but I thought both of those defensive ends and what James Franklin had to say was a bit enlightening this afternoon.
Vilbert's already gotten a little bit of national attention with the highlight of him with his strip sack, the move that he made to get around the left tackle to get to the quarterback. I saw that has been good. It's been on my For You tab for the past couple of days. But I think you talk about Smith Vilbert, and it is kind of crazy. That's been 2 years since he was in a regular season game. 2021. This was his first sack since the Outback Bowl.
Tampa feels like I had a newborn baby at home in Tampa.
I had a different job.
We weren't even working together. Yeah, I mean, it's a long time ago.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of stuff where we talk about we talk a lot about the way college football is with the transfer portal and everything, how quickly things happen and how quickly we expect things to happen. And you see that a lot in conversations about, when a guy is a redshirt freshman and he's not contributing yet. It's like, well, what's going on? What's going on there? And I think that one thing that James Franklin does a good job at with the players in the program is laying out the vision and I think instilling a good sense of patience. For some of these players that they really believe can be contributors, even if it doesn't necessarily happen right away. I think for Smith Vilbert to have everything in order at this point, whatever has sidelined him in 2022, his health after sidelining him last year, I think that's really big. It really does seem like he's driven and that he knows how big of a year this is for him. I know that we've had some chatter on the boards about whether or not he'd be able to get a 7th year to come back. I don't see that happening based on his approach, his comments to you, Tyler, and even what James Franklin is saying about where his aspirations and goals lie. But he's 6'6", was a good basketball player, 280 pounds, is a really imposing presence out there. I think that that's what you want on a defensive line and somebody who can really cause a lot of different problems. So that'll be one storyline to see how it goes through the season, especially as you need more depth at that defensive end spot. With Abdul Carter, James Franklin did a good job of doing the classic. There's more than just the stats that you put on the stat sheet, and I think we saw that with some of the attention that West Virginia was giving to Abdul when he was coming off the edge. Multiple guys blocking him. James Franklin mentioned a couple plays where guys were just tackling Carter as he tried to get into the backfield. And that was something that even up in the press box, not even watching through binoculars, you could see Carter splitting 2 guys and them just taking him immediately to the ground. I think that West Virginia knew that they were going to have to contain Abdul Carter, and I think that's where they put a lot of focus. But that freed some stuff up for some other pressure. Zane Durant got to Abdul Carter. Deni Dennis Sutton was in the backfield a little bit. We saw Tony Rojas get back there on that 2-point conversion attempt. I think that that's what you want to see from your defense. Obviously, you would have loved to see this Abdul Carter debut game with 3 sacks, and he looks like Lawrence Taylor out there. But I think that the fact that you saw how much attention he was getting and what that meant for everybody else, that's one of those residual effects that you feel really, really good about as you move forward into your schedule and with what that means for the other players on the line.
I thought it was Franklin went public with this. I thought it was kind of interesting because he was tipping his cap toward Carter and just saying his ability to take constructive criticism right now in his career coming out of a game like this and with some of what transpired was really impressive to James Franklin. It kind of made it seem like maybe Abdul Carter would have been as reticent to that kind of constructive criticism earlier in his career. But right now, you talk about someone who has a lot to gain from a big season. Abdul Carter been projected as a top half of the first round kind of talent as a junior right now. Let's finish with some comments from James Franklin. He was asked directly about his kicking, his starting kicker, Sander Sahaydak. Second consecutive year where we saw Sahaydak get the nod in game one. Combined 0 for 3 now in field goal opportunities. Of course, he missed the first couple before halftime last year, was promptly benched in favor of Alex Felkins. That remained the rest of the way. Sahaydak, in this case, was true on all of his extra points. Later, with this game already decided, kind of a low-pressure circumstance, but 46-yarder out there on the field. It was a bad miss, wide right, and naturally, the question's going to come up, Mark, when you've got a lot of things going right, and the depth seems to be good and the staff seems to be right, with narrow margins ahead on the scoreboard, not a lot narrower than what you saw in Morgantown. You want to feel comfortable about your kicker spot. James says that they feel confident he's going to hit the next one, and they feel confident in what they witnessed from him in spring ball and in preseason camp and the data they collected. But we know it was a 3-man competition. They brought in a transfer for a reason from Tulsa. And so how do you think that the special teams coordinator, Justin Lustig, and James Franklin should navigate things moving forward through what we don't think will be a lot of sweated out kind of games where a missed field goal here or there is going to cost you the situation?
I think it's imperative that they give him another chance or two, at least. I mean, last year they went away from him. Falcons kicked so well that there was really no reason to go back. But, we've seen how strong his leg is. I mean, we know what this kid's capable of. And now in 2 preseasons, he's established himself as the guy going into the opener who they thought they could rely on. I think one kick is just too much to base it all on. So I hope they give him the opportunity to go out there and prove it. Again, you spent a scholarship on the guy. You might as well see if he's able to do it in these next couple of games where you don't think it's going to be a lot of pressure. And if he can't out of that, then I think you go ahead and make the move. But it's really a weird thing. I mean, the guy has 3 career field goals all against West Virginia and has missed all of them. So he's got to get his head straight. And clearly it's not a physical thing. I mean, he's got to get his mind right, and let's see if Lustig's able to do that. That's part of being a special teams coach. It's not just, X's and O's. It's dealing with kickers and what they're kind of going through mentally.
I got one correction. I think Sahaydak had a couple attempts and with Pinniger in the mix there still in 2022. I think he went 1 of 2, but at this point, I believe
last 2 years, right?
Yeah, and his only make I think is within 30 yards. So we got to start to see it from a guy who was considered the #1 overall place kicker by 24/7 Sports in his class of 2021. Daniel, Mark, appreciate it. A lot of good stuff over at the site that everyone should be checking out. 75% gets you into everything that we're doing at Lions247.com. But we'll be with you again later in the week. These guys will be back for a preview podcast on Thursday. We're all back on the practice field Wednesday together. So ton of stuff coming your way. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Tyler.
All right, this is just episode 1 of 4 here for game week number 2 on the Penn State schedule. We're with you, of course, after the matchup on Saturday. It starts at noon. Fingers crossed that it ends well before 5:45 this time. Whenever it does end, we get a chance to hear from James Franklin, a bunch of players in the media room at Beaver Stadium. We'll regroup. We'll get you all the intel that we're hearing and what we experienced from the second matchup for Penn State out of Bowling Green. But a lot to come before then. We're coming back to you Wednesday. We'll take a bit of a look at this Bowling Green squad. They played 3 Power 5 opponents last year as a FBS squad from the MAC. And they went 2-1 against the betting spread. They outright won one of those games. So I'm not saying you got to sweat it out to 31.5-point spread for a reason, but we'll learn a little bit more about the Bowling Green Falcons, what they bring to Happy Valley. We'll dive into that, and we'll talk about Penn State's recruiting trail efforts right now. They have a big flip here. 4-star wide receiver Matthew Outen joining the 2025 class on a Monday. A ton of coverage of that over at Lions247.com, and a really impressive guest list coming together with some headliners that we want to discuss with Tyler Calvaruso. We'll also get into it on Penn State commits who have come out the gates with strong starts to their high school senior seasons. But we'll talk about that a little later in the week. For now, stepping aside, we hope you enjoyed this episode. We'll do this kind of episode every single Monday coming out of James Franklin's press conference, taking a look back at the last game and doing our best to present the latest facts as they've been presented to us and what we've seen on the field. For now, I'm Tyler Donahue on behalf of Daniel Gallen, Mark Brennan, Tyler Calvaruso, and Grace Brennan at the site. This has been the Lions 24/7 podcast.